Welcome, everybody, and it's particularly nice, Diane, to be here with L'Arche.
Well, thank you.
And with all the good work that you do. And
thank you. It's good to have you here.
It has a little bit of relevance to what I'm going to talk about, which is, in fact, about business and brain and mental health. Because what's happening at the moment is that one of the biggest costs to businesses is people who have brain and mental health problems. In fact, the conference board last year produced a report, and they showed that the cost of just depression and anxiety to the Canadian economy is $50 billion a year, with about two-thirds of that due to depression and one-third of it due to anxiety. And that deals with time off that people are away. It deals with time when people are at work but not really functioning optimally because of their depression or anxiety. And what I want to do is to give you a little bit of overview of some of the exciting advances in knowledge in brain and mental health, and also some changes that I believe are pretty important in terms of public policy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you.
So, first of all, let me start out by saying that 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, probably even 10 years ago, the standard model of the brain was that you have so many neurons and that you gradually lose them over the course of your life, and that you can't repair the brain, or the brain is not capable of being flexible or plastic. We now know that that is completely wrong, and that there is tremendous plasticity in people who have strokes, in people who have developmental issues, tremendous opportunities for us to improve the way that we look after our brains and optimize brain health. I'll give you one example. Dr. Karen Pate, who's in Toronto, has written a book recently about a child with cerebral palsy. And this book is about this child and others. Right? He grew up and was not able to walk because of his cerebral palsy. But curiously, and partly serendipitously, they found that he could learn to run. And so how could somebody who is not able to walk learn to run? I'll come back to that at the end. But that's part of this fascinating story of how the brain works and how we can use the way the brain works to enhance the potential for people really across the board. Now, let me talk a little bit about public policy and some things that we need to do in terms of addressing this crisis, really, in terms of brain and mental health and addictions, because they're all included. First of all, when we're looking at people who are homeless, a large number of them have problems with mental health and or addictions. And one of the first things that we need to do is to make sure that we address this situation and make sure people have a home. They have succeeded in Medicine Hat. I've been there. We can learn from what they're doing. There are interesting developments here in Manitoba. Just in the last year, Marion Willis at Morberg House has established what is, I suppose, a little bit like a family home in St. Boniface. And she's taking people off the street, providing a home, but also a transition from being homeless to being able to look after themselves, have a home, work, etc., etc. Come back to that in a moment. But clearly one of the things that we need to do is to address this problem of homelessness because that's a starting point for helping people who have mental illnesses or brain health problems if we're going to address this broadly. Second, we have at the moment a real crisis in terms of meth addiction and many problems with alcohol and other drug addictions, opioid addictions, for example, suicide, overdoses. What do we need to do in terms of public policy? Right. We're really short in Manitoba of detoxification facilities, particularly for drug addictions, but it also applies to alcohol addiction. But just as important, in fact, probably more important, we've got set up detox facilities to take somebody down and get them off the drug or the alcohol. But that really needs to be very closely coordinated with then a transition help so that people don't just reverse and go back. Because what we've too often got is kind of a revolving door. Right? And this is where, let me come back to Moorburg House, because it's an interesting model and has been very successful, even though it's only operating for about 1 year at this point. What they have found is that in bringing people in, and some of these people, in fact, almost all of them, have some form of combination of mental health and addictions. I mean, these are not easy people, in a sense, to be working with. They have a transitional approach. It's sort of, they make it like a family home. They don't have, as some other organizations do, well, you're here, we'll help you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and that's it. And our funding cuts off, we can't do anything more. They work with people, and when they're ready, those people are able to move out and be on their own. They transition. One of the fascinating things that they have found at Moorburg House is of the about 50 people who have been through it, almost without exception, after about a month there, they no longer have the addiction. They're no longer taking alcohol or drugs. And that the interesting thing in this kind of family atmosphere where they're supported, where they're feeling like they're being able to develop something that has got some self-worth, that the addiction is gone in almost every case in about a month. And it's remarkable, and in almost every instance, so far, as I say, it's only a year old, people are staying away from the drug or the alcohol, and they're moving on with their lives. And this has happened. There's one fellow there who had a PhD and got into mental health problems, became homeless. His life has now been turned around, and he's able to get on with all that potential which would have been lost if he just continued to be out on the street. So, homelessness, addictions. Thirdly, one of the things globally, one of the areas which is emerging as increasingly important in mental health is peer support. Somebody who has had a lived experience with depression, for example, and then has come through it and is at a stage where they can talk about it, where they can talk about their challenges, their success. That can be enormously helpful to others who are in the process right now of dealing with depression or anxiety or suicidality, whatever the problem may be. and that employing peer support workers. In the United Kingdom, I'm told this is one of the fastest growing new employment opportunities. You've got people who are not only very effective in helping people with brain and mental health problems, but they're also, when they're working as part of a team, are actually inspiring the other members of the team. I mean, think about this. This is often an area which is very difficult in the traditional way to be making progress. It can be very frustrating. You feel like, this is not working out. People are not making progress. But if you see somebody who's part of your team and they can talk about their inspiring story, it inspires the whole team. Right? You increase the potential, the ability of that whole team to help you. Fourthly, we need to start putting some psychological services under Medicare, like we do with doctors. We know, for instance, for depression, that treatment by psychologists with psychotherapy is as effective as drug treatment for almost all depression in the short term, but actually more effective in the long term. And we need to broaden out the number of people in the brain and mental health area, the number of people who are there as a resource for people with depression, and to provide effective treatment. We don't have enough psychiatrists, and we're not likely to get it. We have very long waiting lists. Somebody right now who can't get into treatment for depression or a psychiatrist because it's not available and she can't afford a psychologist, so she's on a waiting list. There is not the capacity without putting psychological services under Medicare. And we need to do this not just for depression, we need to do this for children who have behavioral and developmental problems. Because right now, there's delays in assessments, there's delays in a treatment. We need to bring in more resources there so that, in fact, we can help children, because that help can make a difference which will last a lifetime. If you can help these kids early on, it can have an extraordinary impact. And so you have people who are going to be doing well instead of people who will be having difficulties their whole life. Next, we need to understand some of the lifestyle factors which are important. And some of these are pretty simple, right? Getting exercise on a regular basis is important. Your brain uses roughly a third of the energy and oxygen that your body has. It is working hard. And we don't figure it. We think about the heart using, and the muscles using a lot of energy. But in fact, the brain is one of the major consumers of energy. And that's because it's really an extraordinarily important organ for us. And it is helped by exercise, and exercise has a generally positive effect. Exercise is actually where you can use it. Okay? Not everybody with depression has enough get up and go to be exercising, but where you're able to use it, it can be as effective a therapy as drug therapy. Right? It's that good. Sunshine. Sunshine, we know, for example, there's a seasonally affected disorder where people who are depressed, sad, particularly in the winter when there's less sun, they can be treated by having appropriate lights. But sunshine is good for virtually everybody, right? And it's a kind of a bell-shaped curve. And lack of sunshine may not tip us over into depression, but it can certainly put us in a better mood. And I have, as a politician, I can't tell you how many apartment blocks I've been into and found people with mental and brain health problems in dark, windowless basement places, right? We don't recognize that this is happening all around us. We see this as politicians, but, hello. There are things in terms of how we design buildings and where we put people that are actually very important. Diet. One of the things that is emerging, right, in terms of our knowledge, it is quite likely, not accepted as definitive at this point, but it is quite likely that our human brains evolved at a time when early humans were at the ocean, not on the savanna of Africa. And where there was a rich source of fish and seafood, and a stable and abundant source. And part of the reason for believing this is that half the weight of your cell membranes and neurons is made up of a highly unusual fatty acid called, it's an omega-3 long chain called DHA. And that DHA in our diet is found almost exclusively in fish and seafood and some algal oils. We now get it in supplements. But we don't have the capacity, not very effective in converting shorter chain omega-3 fatty acids found in flax, right, into DHA and EPA. Interestingly, chickens are better than we are. And so if you have chickens fed flax, right, they're an omega-3 eggs, they will usually have a considerable amount of the DHA, right? It's now one of the sources. And people are working with other crops to try and have them have DHA and EPA. DHA is structural, EPA is important as a messenger, precursor, messenger molecules. Strikingly, the incidence of depression in people who live in countries where there is much more seafood consumed have strikingly lower incidence of depression. And there is a lot of work now looking at treating with supplements, with omega-3, DHA, and EPA, to treat depression. And some studies have been positive and others negative, but it looks as if you need a supplement which has got more than 60% of EPA relative to DHA, right, to treat depression. The other thing, it is not something like, say, a drug which works immediately. Okay? You need to replace the fatty acids in your brain cell membrane. That takes several weeks. And so where it's been shown to be effective, you see an effect which is gradual over 4 to 8 to 12 weeks. But the surprising decrease in depression has been shown in a number of studies. So EPA and DHA were found to be very important for the development of newborn and infant brains. Right? So all formulas now have added DHA and EPA because it's so important. DHA and EPA supplementation during pregnancy looks as if they will decrease the number of children born very early and the infant mortality rate. Right? Again, because they're strikingly important Those are important times during the last third of pregnancy and the first few years of life for brain development. In school kids in Sweden, they have found that kids who eat more fish do better on school tests, strikingly so. And it's a matter of not less than one fish a week, meal of fish, 1 to 2 meals, to more than 2 meals, and they can see this difference. So fish may be important for brain health, and strikingly may also be important in terms of violence, anger. Right? In England and in Holland, they took people who were in prisons and they gave the two groups one supplementation with EHA and DPA and some other vitamins and the other not. The group which was supplemented had about a 1/3 drop in both studies independently, about a 1/3 drop in the report of violent incidents in prison. And so if we want to address violence in society, maybe this is one of the things that we need to be understanding more about. So lifestyle factors, very important. Now, learning disorders. Learning disorders are, interestingly enough, roughly 30% of the people who are in prison have a learning disorder. People with learning disorders get frustrated and often end up being depressed, right, and having mental health problems. If we're going to address the burden of mental health and brain health, we need to make sure that we are doing a much better job in terms of learning disorders. And there's some fascinating developments. Right? A woman by the name of Barbara Arrowsmith Young has developed an approach to helping kids with learning disorders. Learning Disorders Disabilities Association of Manitoba uses this approach, but they have to charge for it in order to deliver it, and so it really is not available to only a small proportion of children and adults who actually need it. We need to make that much more available, and that's part of what we could do by having more psychologists under medical. Lastly, it's important to note there's been a lot of discussion in the media, particularly over the last little while and very recently, about domestic violence. And domestic violence often is a setup for leading to problems with mental and brain health. And we need to be aware of that. And for business people, we need to be conscious of the root causes sometimes. And one more thing, when we're dealing with patients with mental health, one of the problems is they tend to get isolated. Right? We need to have the ability to develop circles of care, right, around people with mental health problems. And that includes, interestingly enough, being able to set up that sort of help for somebody who's working in a business. Right? If you know somebody has a mental or brain health problem, they may be more susceptible to times of stress. Okay? If you're aware of that, you can shield them. There are times when people can be very productive and extraordinarily so, very creative, but other times where they have to draw back. If you've got the support network and the ability to understand that, just as we do much better for physical problems, then you're able to provide that support. We need to enable healthcare professionals to be able to dialogue, right, with the circles of support, which has been a major problem. This is what happened with Bonnie Decker's son, Reed. Right? He was discharged from the Crisis Response Center and sent home without telling the family, and they didn't find out till 4 hours too late and that time it was too late, and he committed suicide, and they didn't find him for months later in the Red River. So we need to have much more openness, an ability to be more open, and some of that may require changes in legislation in order to do that properly. That's kind of an overview. I think it's important that as individuals, as business people, as politicians, that we're understanding of what's happening. I'm going to come back now to where I started, which is Dr. Karen Pay's story of a boy with cerebral palsy who couldn't walk but who could run beautifully. How could that happen? One of the things that we now understand is that when you develop the ability to walk or run or play golf or what have you, you develop pathways in your brain. And they become, in a sense, highways for information. So that when you click in and you start a golf swing, right, that highway all goes into working, into action, right, and helps you deliver that golf swing. If you start out and you don't learn the golf swing well, then you develop the highway in the wrong way. Okay? And in fact, what happened to this boy with cerebral palsy, as it happens with many others, is that he had a brain injury at birth. Early on, when he was learning to walk, he was learning with an injured brain. And so he wasn't able to develop the pathway to walk normally. And so he developed a pathway for an abnormal walk. Right? And that was the highway that was written in his brain. Once you've developed that, it becomes very difficult to change it. But interestingly enough, but it's possible, right? It needs a lot of work. You need to understand that it's difficult and put that effort in. But if you develop a new pathway, and so what he did was to develop a new pathway for running, which was separate from his pathway for walking. And because he developed it later on, he was able to learn to run perfectly, even though he was still having trouble walking and having difficulty. This was how it happened. So this is some of the fascinating things that we're learning about how the brain works. Understanding it can help us with people who have various difficulties. Understanding the plasticity of the brain can help us deal with recovery from stroke. Tremendous amount of work, and Norman Boyd has written extensively on this if you're interested. But we're also, and you're facing older people and health care for older people, dementia. Right? We have started out with the idea that we would find a magic bullet for dementia. Right? So people have been through 200 separate drugs that have been developed, and virtually none of them have shown significant success, maybe small benefits in some. What is happening right now is a recognition that, as with a lot of other complex problems, we need not a single bullet. We need a combined multimodal approach. Okay? We use a multimodal approach for treating cancer, for treating heart disease. This type of multimodal approach is now being used in a few areas in the world, and so far the results are remarkable in finding, for example, that a significant proportion of people with dementia who had to stop work or about to stop work can actually recover their functions well enough that they can go back to work and do well. So there is a lot of hope on the horizon. We're a long way from being that and helping everybody. But I think with what we now know about brain and mental health, we could do extraordinarily better in preventing problems helping people and in preventing later problems with dementia.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Very informative. Thank you.
Video provided by High Hopes Communications.